Hello guys! Thank you for checking out the new episode of the Devlog. In the last 2 months we talked about movement and animation, and now it's time to address one of the biggest and most important points for this game, the dialogue system. I also wrote the dialogue system for my first game Clio myself, so now I had the advantage of knowing exactly which aspects I wanted to improve. And in this devlog I want to give you an insight into the new dialogue system and its differences to the old one, and explain why I think it will speed up my workflow a lot. To better understand the new system, let's first take a quick look at how things worked in Clio. Clio's dialogues were organized in table format. The tables were later exported as CSV files and imported into Unity. Each row of a table represented one line of dialogue, and each cell contained basic information, like the name of the speaker, which was used to set up the dialog box with the matching color, name and sprites, the actual text to show up inside the text box, and the emotion to show a specific sprite of the character. Basically, the dialogue system just went from row to row and updated the dialogue UI. For dialogue choices, I added 2 additional columns to the table, nods and links, so that it was possible to define multiple available lines to continue the dialogue depending on the player's input. Then there was a column for changing variables, one for translated text, and one for a unique audio ID to play the according voiceover file.
Given anything for a mustache like
All of this ended up working very well, but it also had a few drawbacks that I really wanted to address in the new system. For example, and above all, editing. Editing dialogue in this system was not very efficient, since if there was an error or crash in a dialogue, I had to exit Unity, find the appropriate dialogue in my Excel documents, locate the error, fix it and save the file, export the table as a CSV again, with special settings, and then replace the old file in Unity. And only after all these steps I was able to test the dialogue again from the beginning. Another drawback of this system was that it was really designed strictly to display one line of dialogue after another. In the system it was not possible for 2 people to say something at the same time. And it was not possible to insert pauses between the lines. There are scenes where a dialogue is briefly interrupted, a character does something and then the dialogue continues, but behind the scenes the dialogue actually completely stopped, a cutscene was triggered, and after that a new dialogue started. That was a lot of work to set up every time and also very error prone. So in the new system I wanted to be able to edit dialogue quickly, best case without even having to tap out of Unity. And I wanted the system to be much more versatile so that I can make multiple characters speak at the same time, insert pauses and also trigger animations and events in the scene. To achieve all of that, I came up with the following solution. First, I defined a custom class called Operation Class. I decided to call it Operation because this class is not only for dialogue lines, but for many different things. You can think of an instance of this class as a row in the table from earlier. And each of these variables is again used to define different things. Performer, for example, again defines the person who is to perform something, like speaking a line of dialogue that is defined in the variable text, or play an animation, walk to a point in the scene, turn in a certain direction, and more. There are also links and nods again, which work similar to the old system for dialogue choices. To set up a whole dialogue, several instances of this class can now be created and filled with information. All instances are then stored in an array. I think of this visually simply as a stack of index cards. So let's stick to this visual comparison for this video. I then have a script called Timeline of Operations that is responsible for going through this stack of cards, one instance at a time, and executing whatever is written down on the card. For example, the script looks at the first instance and it looks like this. The performer is player and the line of dialogue is "Can I go in?" Then the script looks in the scene if there is a performer called player, and if so, triggers a dialogue bubble above his head with the according text. In this case, no further variables are filled. So after a short amount of time, the script figuratively just draws the next card and continues. Here we have now guard as the performer and the text "No, never", but also an animation. So the script looks for the performer called guard in the scene, triggers a dialogue bubble above his head, and simultaneously plays the animation "Ready to Fight" on his game object. On the next card, again, player is the performer. There is no text in it, but the variable walk to POI contains the information path. The script looks for the performer player and for a waypoint called path, and lets him walk to this waypoint. Also, in this instance, the variable wait for callback is true, which means the script waits for the performer to arrive at the waypoint and then continues to draw the next card. With the variable wait for seconds, I can add pauses between the lines, or if it is set to 0, the script will immediately continue to the next instance, and this is how multiple actions can be triggered at the same time. With the variable OP_state, I can change the game state and therefore can define if player input is allowed or not. And with conditions, I can link an instance to different requirements. For example, if a dialog option should only be displayed if a certain item is in the inventory or something like that. I can give a line of dialog in alternative text to show up as a dialog option. I can call functions on the game object, edit memories and variables, add or remove items from the inventory, and give a line of comment for debugging and organizational things. The tag ID will later be used for localization and managing the audio files. All this works really great and is very flexible to work with. But let's talk about editability now. I said earlier that with Clio it was the case that for any change to a dialog I had to leave Unity to edit an external file and then import it back. Now I want to be able to make the changes directly in the project or even create a whole new dialog without leaving Unity. But still it must be possible to access and create data externally, because if the project is not open and I want to work on a dialog, it would be unnecessary and time-consuming to load the whole project just for that. And to make this possible, I came up with the idea to make a scriptable object called Operation Stack that contains the information of a dialog and is responsible for creating and editing the instances. This may sound a bit confusing and unnecessary at first, but I think it will become clear in a minute. The scriptable object Operation Stack is made up of two parts. First, a list of the operation class. So it is holding and managing a stack of cards, if you will. And second, a JSON text asset. I think JSON is a good file type to use here because it can easily be read and written from Unity, it is quite easy to read for a human, and it quickly can be opened up in a table format to work with an external software. The scriptable object can convert a JSON file into a list of the operation class. And it can do the other way around and write into a JSON file, or even create a completely new one. And the timeline of operation script that we already talked about and that is responsible for going through a stack and executing the actions simply is referencing this scriptable object. This is very handy because now I can work on a dialog from anywhere, either outside of Unity by simply opening up a JSON file in a table format. The scriptable object then takes care of updating the stack, and so the dialog in the scene is directly up to date too. But I can also edit the dialog in the scriptable object and then tell it to overwrite the JSON file. And it's even possible to make changes directly in the scene, since the timeline script directly references the scriptable object. And this approach allowed me to build my own editor tool in Unity to quickly browse and edit the stack or create a new stack. I know that was a lot at once and very theoretical, but to make it even clearer, I would like to create a new dialog with you guys and show you the different methods of editing in action. I think it will become very clear on how effective the system is now. So let's start inside of Unity and create a new dialog with the custom editor that I built. I can quickly type down the first draft of the dialog without even worrying about all the other features. In the top right you can see a list of operations growing. I can even click on an operation to quickly jump to it and edit it. So I think this is okay for the first draft. I give the dialog the name guard devlog test, and down here I have the choice to generate a new scriptable object. Or, what we do now, a scriptable object along with a JSON file. After a short amount of time, we have a new folder in our dialog folder called guard devlog test. And in here we find the JSON file and the scriptable object. Let's take a look inside of the scriptable object. You can see that it is already holding a reference to the JSON file, and it is already containing the list of operations. I now just drag and drop the scriptable object into a scene onto a timeline script, like onto an NPC or whatever, and that's it for the setup. If I play the scene, the dialog is already working. And of course, all of this is just placeholders. The design of the dialog UI will obviously be worked on later. And now let's add a little more life to the dialog. I can open up the scriptable object, for example, and simply add a few more things. Let's say I want to turn the player towards the guard when he speaks to him. I just add guard to the turn towards variable here. And I want the player to walk towards the guard 2 lines later. Again, I just add guard to the variable walk to POI. For the last line, I want to trigger the animation ready to fight on the guard, so I simply add this here under animation. Let's test the scene again. Nice, this works. But I found a typo in one of the lines. The cool thing is that I don't even have to find the scriptable objects in my folder to correct it. I can edit the line directly in the scene view and let the scriptable object, as well as the JSON file, update along with it. Now let's say I want to make this dialog more complex, and I want to work on it outside of Unity. In this case, I would open up the JSON file in a table format and work on it. Let's put in a section where the player can choose multiple dialog options. When I am ready, I can open up Unity and say the scriptable object to read the data from the attached JSON file, and I'm done. The dialog is updated and synchronized everywhere. Let's test the dialog a final time in the scene. That's it for this episode of the Devlog. If there's anything you're particularly interested in for the next Devlogs, please let me know in the comments, and please don't forget to wishlist the game on Steam. Have a great month everybody, and see you on September 1st.